What would you do if you saw a decorated war hero break down in tears before a judge, apologizing for something that wasn't even his fault? The answer will restore your faith in humanity. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time someone showed you unexpected mercy. This story is about to change how you see justice forever. In Providence, Rhode Island, on a cold Tuesday morning in February 2019, the municipal courtroom was packed. Case number 2019 MC 4782 was about to be called. Nobody in that room knew they were about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. Hit that subscribe button if you believe our veterans deserve better treatment than what they usually get. Because what happened next proves why Judge Frank Caprio has become a legend. Robert Michael Henderson sat in the third row, his worn camouflage jacket hanging loose on his frame. At 47 years old, Robert looked at least a decade older. His hair had gone completely gray. Deep lines etched his face like canyons carved by years of pain. His right leg, the prosthetic one, extended stiffly in front of him. He kept adjusting it, clearly uncomfortable. Next to him sat his daughter, Emma Henderson, 22 years old, wearing her nursing scrubs from the night shift she'd just finished. She held her father's hand tightly. Her eyes were red from crying, though she was trying hard to stay composed for him. On his other side, his wife Margaret, 45, clutched a folder containing medical documents, parking tickets, and letters that told a story nobody should have to live. Robert had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He'd been a staff sergeant in the Army, leading a convoy security team. In 2014, during his final tour, an IED explosion had changed everything. The blast had taken his right leg below the knee, damaged his hearing permanently, and left him with traumatic brain injury that caused memory issues and severe PTSD. The parking tickets in that folder weren't from reckless behavior. They weren't from someone who didn't care about rules. They were from a man whose brain sometimes forgot where he was, what day it was, or why he'd parked where he'd parked. Like this video, if you've ever struggled with something beyond your control and felt judged for it. Because what Robert was about to experience shows there are still people who understand. Case number 2019, MC 4782, Robert Henderson. The bailiff called out, his voice echoing through the wood-paneled courtroom. Robert struggled to stand. His prosthetic leg had stiffened from sitting. Emma immediately moved to help him, but he gently waved her off, pride mixed with pain on his face. He'd been a soldier. He'd led men into combat. He could walk into a courtroom on his own, even if it took everything he had. Judge Frank Caprio watched this all unfold. At 78 years old, Judge Caprio had presided over the Providence Municipal Court for decades. He wasn't just any judge. He'd become famous for his compassionate approach to justice, his ability to see beyond the case file to the human being standing before him. Videos of his courtroom had gone viral millions of times, but this case would become one of his most powerful moments ever captured. Robert made his way to the podium, limping heavily. Each step echoed in the silent courtroom. You could hear his prosthetic leg's mechanical click with every movement. When he finally reached his position, he was breathing hard from the effort. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," Judge Caprio said softly. His voice carried warmth that immediately cut through the tension. "Good morning, Your Honor," Robert replied, his voice shaking slightly. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jennifer Martinez, stood to present the case. "Your Honor, Mr. Henderson has accumulated 7 parking violations over the past 18 months. The total fines amount to $850. He's here because these violations have gone unpaid, and according to city ordinance." Judge Caprio raised his hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "I can read the file, Ms. Martinez. Thank you." He turned his attention fully to Robert. "Mr. Henderson, I see you're wearing a military jacket. Did you serve?" Quote. Robert straightened up as much as his condition allowed. "Yes, sir. United States Army. Staff Sergeant. 3 tours in Afghanistan." Share this video with a veteran in your life who needs to know their sacrifices recognized. What happens next will remind you why we must honor those who served. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers and whispered conversations had stopped. Everyone was watching now. Judge Caprio leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on Robert with an intensity that was both gentle and penetrating. "Tell me about these parking tickets, Mr. Henderson. 7 violations in 18 months. That's quite a few. What's been going on?" Quote. This was the moment Robert had been dreading. He'd rehearsed what he'd say. Margaret had helped him practice. Emma had written down key points for him to remember. But now, standing in this courtroom, with everyone's eyes on him, the words stuck in his throat. His hands began to tremble. He gripped the podium to steady them. "Your Honor, He stopped, took a breath. "I'm sorry, sir. I have memory issues. From my service, I have TBI, traumatic brain injury, and PTSD. Sometimes I park somewhere and I forget why I parked there. Or I forget it's a restricted zone. Or I lose track of time completely." His voice cracked on those last words. Emma, still sitting in the gallery, wiped tears from her eyes. Margaret clutched the folder so hard her knuckles had turned white. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "I see in your file that you have medical documentation about your condition. Tell me more about what happened to you if you're comfortable sharing." Robert's jaw tightened. For a moment it looked like he might refuse. These weren't memories he enjoyed revisiting. But something in Judge Caprio's tone, the genuine interest and compassion in his voice, made him continue. "November 2014, Your Honor. My convoy was heading back to base outside Kandahar. We'd just completed a security sweep. I was in the lead vehicle." He paused, his eyes distant now, seeing something only he could see. "The IED was buried in the road. We didn't see it. Nobody saw it." Quote, "The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Every person in that room was holding their breath. The explosion killed Corporal James Mitchell, 23 years old from Ohio. Private First Class Devin Brown, 20 years old from Florida. Specialist Thomas Carr, 25 years old from Texas. 3 good men. 3 families destroyed." Robert's voice had gone hollow. "I lived, lost my leg, lost pieces of my memory, lost my ability to sleep through the night, but I lived. Comment below with the name of a fallen soldier you want to honor. Their sacrifice should never be forgotten." A woman in the gallery gasped softly. Judge Caprio removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. The prosecutor, Jennifer Martinez, was no longer looking at her notes. She was staring at Robert with an expression of profound sadness and respect. "After I came home," Robert continued, "I tried to get back to normal life. I really did. I got the prosthetic leg. I did the physical therapy. I went to the VA for counseling. But normal life isn't normal anymore when your brain doesn't work the way it used to." He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. It was worn, the edges frayed from constant use. "I carry this everywhere. It's my memory. I write down everything I need to remember because if I don't write it down, it's gone. Where I parked. What time I need to be somewhere. What day it is. Sometimes I write down the same thing 5 times because I forget I already wrote it." Quote. Margaret stood up suddenly from her seat. "Your Honor, may I approach?" Quote. Judge Caprio nodded. "Please, come forward." Margaret walked to the podium and stood beside her husband. She opened the folder she'd been clutching. "Your Honor, I'm Margaret Henderson, Robert's wife. I have documentation here. Medical records from the VA showing his TBI diagnosis, his PTSD treatment records, his prescription medications." She pulled out papers with shaking hands. Every one of these parking tickets happened on days when Robert was having particularly bad episodes. Quote. She laid out the documents on the podium. The first ticket, March 2017, that was the day after he'd had a nightmare so severe he didn't sleep at all. He'd driven to the pharmacy to get his medications adjusted and parked in a loading zone without realizing it. He sat in that pharmacy waiting room for 3 hours, confused about why it was taking so long, not realizing he'd already picked up his prescription and put it in the car. Hit subscribe if you believe families of veterans carry invisible wounds too. Margaret's testimony is about to reveal just how much. Judge Caprio was looking through the documents as Margaret spoke, his expression growing more pained with each page he turned. The second ticket, June 2017. Robert had a doctor's appointment at the VA. He parked in a 2-hour zone. The appointment ran long because they were adjusting his prosthetic. He was in pain, Your Honor. Severe pain. By the time he got back to the car, he'd been there 3 hours. There was a ticket on his windshield. Emma had joined her mother now, standing on the other side of her father. I'm Emma, their daughter. I want to add something, Your Honor. She was crying openly now, but speaking clearly. My dad, he's a proud man. He was a leader in the military. He saved lives. He was decorated multiple times. Coming home and struggling with daily tasks like parking a car, it destroys him. Every ticket he gets, he sees it as another failure. Robert's shoulders started shaking. He was trying desperately not to cry, but he was losing the battle. Your Honor, I'm so sorry. I never meant to break the law. I never meant to cause problems. Sometimes my brain doesn't work right anymore. I try to remember. I try so hard, but I can't always control it. Quote, the dam broke. This decorated veteran, this man who had led soldiers into combat, who had survived an explosion that killed his friends, who had endured years of pain and struggle, broke down completely. His sobs echoed through the courtroom, raw and heartbreaking. Judge Caprio stood up from his bench. This was unprecedented. Judges don't leave their elevated position, but Frank Caprio wasn't just any judge. He stepped down and walked around to where Robert stood. Mr. Henderson, look at me, he said gently, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. Robert looked up, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm so sorry. For everything. For the tickets. For breaking down like this. I'm sorry. Drop a comment if you're crying watching this too. What Judge Caprio said next will stay with you forever. Judge Caprio's own eyes were wet now. Stop apologizing. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. Do you hear me? Quote, the entire courtroom was crying now. The bailiff wiped his eyes. The court reporter had stopped typing, tears falling onto her machine. Jennifer Martinez, the prosecutor, was openly weeping. Court staff who'd seen thousands of cases had never seen anything like this. You went to Afghanistan not once, not twice, but 3 times. Judge Caprio continued, his voice thick with emotion. You put your life on the line for this country, for all of us in this room, for people you've never met and will never meet. You watched your friends die. You lost your leg. You came home with injuries that will affect you for the rest of your life. He paused, making sure Robert was listening to every word. And you're standing here apologizing to me for parking tickets, for a condition that was caused by your service to this nation? Quote, Robert couldn't speak. He just shook his head, overwhelmed. Judge Caprio turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Martinez, what does the city recommend in this case? Quote, Jennifer Martinez stood, wiping her eyes quickly. Her voice wavered as she spoke. Your Honor, I came in here prepared to recommend full payment of the fines or community service. But after hearing Mr. Henderson's testimony, I cannot in good conscience do that. The city withdraws all charges. The tickets should be dismissed with prejudice. Applause erupted in the courtroom gallery. Spontaneous, thunderous applause. People were standing. The bailiff didn't stop them, even though applause in court is typically prohibited. Some moments transcend protocol. But Judge Caprio held up his hand for quiet. Wait, I'm not finished. The room fell silent again. Everyone wanted to hear what else he had to say. Like, this video, if you believe, this is what justice should always look like. Because Judge Caprio wasn't done showing mercy. Ms. Martinez, I appreciate the city's position. But I'm going to go further. Mr. Henderson, I'm not just dismissing these tickets. I'm also issuing an order that any future parking violations you receive in Providence, within reason, will be automatically reviewed by my office before any penalties are assessed. You will never have to worry about this again in my city. Margaret gasped. Emma grabbed her father's arm, hardly believing what she was hearing. Robert just stood there, stunned into silence. Judge Caprio continued. Furthermore, I'm going to make a personal phone call to the mayor's office. Providence has a disabled veteran parking permit program that you should have been enrolled in years ago. I'm going to make sure you get that permit expedited. No more worrying about time limits or zones. You've earned that right." Robert finally found his voice. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Then don't say anything," Judge Caprio replied with a warm smile. "Just go home. Take care of yourself. Take care of this beautiful family that clearly loves you very much. And know that this courtroom, this judge, and this city recognize your sacrifice." He walked back to his bench but turned before sitting down. "And Mr. Henderson, one more thing. You said you lost 3 good men in that explosion. James Mitchell, Devin Brown, and Thomas Carr. You told me their names, their ages, where they were from. You remember them. That's not a broken memory, sir. That's a heart that honors its fallen. There's nothing wrong with your memory when it comes to what truly matters." The courtroom erupted again. This time, Judge Caprio let them applaud. He stood at his bench, watching the Henderson family embrace each other, all 3 of them crying tears of relief and gratitude. But the story doesn't end there. And what happened next would prove why this moment was more than just a kind gesture from a compassionate judge. Share this with someone who needs to see that compassion still exists in our justice system. The ripple effects of this decision changed everything. As Robert, Margaret, and Emma prepared to leave the courtroom, something unexpected happened. A man in his 60s stood up from the gallery. He was wearing a Navy veteran's cap. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Quote. Judge Caprio looked surprised but nodded. "Please, come forward and state your name." "Harold Simmons, Your Honor. Navy veteran, Vietnam War." Harold walked to the front of the courtroom with purpose. "I've been sitting here watching this case. I have 2 parking tickets myself. I was going to contest them, but after seeing what you just did for this young man, I want to pay his fines instead." The courtroom collectively gasped. Judge Caprio looked taken aback. "Mr. Simmons, that's a generous offer, but there are no fines to pay. The case has been dismissed." Harold smiled. "Then I'll pay the $850 to the Providence Veterans Fund in honor of Corporal James Mitchell, Private First Class Devin Brown, and Specialist Thomas Carr, the men who didn't make it home." Quote. Robert turned around to face Harold, tears streaming down his face again. He tried to speak but couldn't. Harold walked over and embraced him. 2 veterans, 2 different wars, one shared understanding of sacrifice. "Brothers in arms," Harold whispered. "We take care of our own." Another man stood up, then another, then a woman in a Marine Corps jacket. One by one, veterans in the courtroom gallery stood up. There were 7 of them. They'd all come for various parking and traffic violations. Now they were all standing in solidarity. A woman named Patricia Rodriguez, a Gulf War veteran, spoke up. "Your Honor, we'd all like to contribute to the Providence Veterans Fund. Whatever our fines would have been, we'll donate double that amount in honor of the fallen." Judge Caprio had to pause and compose himself. In 30 years on the bench, he'd seen many emotional cases. But this spontaneous outpouring of brotherhood and solidarity was something entirely different. Comment below if you're a veteran or if you love a veteran. This community needs to see your support. The court reporter, a woman named Susan Chin, suddenly spoke up. "Your Honor, I'd like to contribute as well. My brother served in Iraq. He didn't come home. I'd like to donate in his memory." The bailiff, Officer Marcus Thompson, added his voice. "Count me in too, Judge. My son is currently deployed. I want to contribute." Even Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez spoke up. "Your Honor, please add my contribution. My grandfather served in World War II. This is the least I can do." Within minutes, what had started as a case about unpaid parking tickets had transformed into a spontaneous fundraiser for veterans. People were pulling out their wallets, writing down pledge amounts. The energy in the courtroom had shifted from sadness to something powerful and purposeful. Judge Caprio had to gavel for order, but he was smiling through his tears. All right. Let's maintain some decorum here, folks. This is still a courtroom." But his tone was warm, not chastising. "I'm going to take a brief recess. When we resume, we'll continue with scheduled cases. But I want everyone who wishes to contribute to see my clerk. We'll coordinate everything properly." He turned to Robert one last time. Mr. Henderson, you came here today expecting judgment. Instead, you found community. You found brothers and sisters who understand. You found people who care. Never forget that you are not alone in your struggle. This city, this courtroom, these people, we've got your back. Robert stood at attention as best he could with his prosthetic leg and saluted the judge. It was instinctive, military training kicking in even after years away from service. Judge Caprio returned the salute with precision and respect. The courtroom gave a standing ovation as the Henderson family made their way out. People shook Robert's hand, hugged him, thanked him for his service. It took 20 minutes for them to make it to the exit because so many people wanted to connect with them. Outside the courthouse, on the cold Providence morning, Robert stopped and took a deep breath. Emma hugged him tight. Margaret kissed his cheek. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, "so incredibly proud." "I don't understand what just happened," Robert said, his voice still shaky. "I came here thinking I'd lose my license or go to jail or something. And instead, you met Judge Caprio," Emma finished. "Dad, what happened in there? People need to hear about this. They need to know there are still good people in the world." Hit that subscribe button, because the impact of this story goes even deeper than you think. What happened in the following weeks will restore your faith in humanity. The Henderson family didn't know it yet, but someone in that courtroom had been recording the proceedings. It was legal in Rhode Island's municipal courts, and the video was about to change their lives again. Within 48 hours, the video had been uploaded to social media. Within a week, it had been viewed 15 million times. News outlets across the country picked up the story. "Judge shows mercy to disabled veteran," ran the headlines. But it wasn't just about the mercy. It was about the community response, the spontaneous fundraising, the brotherhood displayed. The Providence Veterans Fund, which had been struggling with less than $10,000 in its account, suddenly had over $200,000 in donations. People from all 50 states sent contributions. Veterans organizations reached out offering support. Local businesses in Providence pledged ongoing support. But more importantly, Robert Henderson's story resonated with thousands of veterans dealing with similar struggles. The VA office in Providence was flooded with calls from veterans who'd been suffering in silence, thinking they were alone in their struggles with TBI, PTSD, and memory issues. Suddenly, they had hope that understanding and support existed. 3 weeks after the court hearing, Judge Caprio received a letter. It was from the mother of Corporal James Mitchell, one of the soldiers who had died in the IED explosion with Robert. Her name was Catherine Mitchell, and she lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. In her letter, she wrote, "Dear Judge Caprio, I saw the video of Robert Henderson's court appearance. I have spent 5 years being angry at the world for taking my son. But watching you show such compassion to a man who served alongside James, who survived when James didn't, who carries the guilt and pain of that day, it changed something in me. Thank you for honoring my son's memory by helping his fellow soldier. Thank you for reminding me that there's still goodness in this world. Robert, if you're reading this, my son would be proud to know you're getting the help and support you deserve. You have nothing to feel guilty about. Nothing." Judge Caprio shared this letter with Robert, who broke down crying when he read it. For 5 years, he'd carried crushing guilt about surviving when his friends hadn't. Catherine Mitchell's words began a healing process he didn't know was possible. Like this video, if you believe healing can come from unexpected places. Because the story continues to unfold in beautiful ways. 2 months after the initial court hearing, Judge Caprio invited Robert back to the courthouse. But this time, it wasn't for a violation. It was for a ceremony. The Providence mayor, Jorge Elorza, was there. City council members attended. Veterans, organization representatives filled the room. And Robert, Margaret, and Emma Henderson sat in the front row, confused about why they'd been invited. Judge Caprio took the podium. "We're here today to recognize someone extraordinary. Robert Henderson came into my courtroom 2 months ago, expecting judgment. What he received was justice. But true justice doesn't end with a dismissed case. It continues with action and change." He gestured to the mayor. "Mayor Elorza has something to announce." The mayor stepped forward. Effective immediately, the City of Providence is launching the Henderson Initiative. This program will provide automatic parking permit waivers for all veterans with documented TBI, PTSD, or mobility issues. No more tickets, no more stress. No more veterans having to apologize for conditions caused by their service to our nation. The room applauded, but the mayor wasn't finished. Additionally, we're establishing a veterans liaison position in the city administration. This person's sole job will be connecting veterans with resources, advocating for their needs, and ensuring no veteran in Providence falls through the cracks again. Robert was crying again. So was Margaret. Emma held both her parents' hands, tears streaming down her own face. Judge Caprio spoke again. "Mr. Henderson, you came into my courtroom carrying shame and fear. You left with dignity restored. But more than that, your story has sparked a movement. 12 other cities across America have contacted us about implementing similar programs. Your struggle, your honesty, your courage in sharing your pain is creating change for veterans everywhere." He pulled out another document. One more thing. The Providence Veterans Fund, which received over $200,000 in donations after your case went viral, has created an annual scholarship in honor of Corporal James Mitchell, Private First Class Devin Brown, and Specialist Thomas Carr. 3 scholarships, $5,000 each, will be awarded every year to children of fallen soldiers from Rhode Island. The first recipients will be announced next month. Robert stood up, unsteady on his prosthetic leg but determined to stand with strength. "Your Honor, Mayor, everyone here, I don't have words adequate to express what this means. When I walked into that courtroom 2 months ago, I felt like a failure. I felt like I'd let down my family, my community, my country. I was drowning in shame." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "What happened that day, what you did, Judge Caprio, it didn't just dismiss parking tickets, it gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. It gave me back my dignity. It reminded me that my service mattered, that my sacrifices weren't in vain, that I'm not broken, just wounded, and wounds can heal. Share this video with every veteran you know. The transformation isn't over yet." He turned to face the audience. "To every veteran watching this or hearing about this, please know you're not alone. Whatever you're struggling with, whether it's physical injuries, mental health issues, memory problems, whatever it is, there are people who care. There are people who understand. Don't suffer in silence like I did. Reach out, ask for help. There's no shame in needing support." Margaret stood beside him. "I want to add something. I'm the wife of a veteran. I've watched my husband struggle for 5 years. I've felt helpless so many times. To the families of veterans, you're not alone either. This affects all of us. Judge Caprio's compassion that day validated our struggle too. It told us that we're seen, we're heard, and we matter." Emma added her voice. "I grew up with a hero for a dad. But after his injury, I watched him struggle to be that hero in everyday life. It broke my heart. What happened in that courtroom reminded me that heroism isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up even when it's hard. Dad, you're still my hero. You always will be." The ceremony concluded with a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Local news covered the event. The video received another surge of millions of views. But more importantly, veterans across the country were finally talking about their struggles, seeking help, and finding communities of support. 6 months later, Judge Caprio received another update. This one came from Robert himself, in the form of a handwritten letter. "Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted to update you on how things have been going. I'm writing this letter by hand because I want you to see that my hands are steady now. 6 months ago, they shook constantly. The therapy I've been getting through the new VA resources that connected with me after our case has made a tremendous difference. I'm sleeping better. The nightmares haven't stopped completely, but they're less frequent and less intense. I'm learning coping strategies for the memory issues. I still carry my notebook everywhere, but now it feels like a tool instead of a crutch. Margaret and Emma are doing better too. The stress that our whole family was under, it was crushing us. Your act of mercy didn't just help me, it saved my family. I've started volunteering with a local veterans support group. I share my story, and I've watched other veterans cry with relief when they realize they're not alone. I've become friends with Harold Simmons, the Navy vet who stood up in court that day. We meet for coffee every week. We talk about our service, our struggles, and our hopes. I wanted you to know that the 3 scholarships in honor of Mitchell, Brown, and Carr were awarded last month. I attended the ceremony. I met the recipients. I told them about the soldiers those scholarships honor. It was painful but healing. Thank you doesn't begin to cover what I owe you. You gave me back my life. You showed me that justice can be merciful and mercy can be just. You've inspired me to be better, to help others, to honor my fallen brothers by living a life worthy of their sacrifice. With deepest gratitude and respect, Robert Michael Henderson, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Comment below if this story has changed how you see justice and mercy. Your words matter to veterans reading this. Judge Caprio kept that letter framed in his office. He showed it to law students who came to observe his courtroom. He shared it in speeches about compassionate justice. It reminded him why he'd become a judge in the first place, not to punish, but to serve justice with humanity. The Henderson case became a teaching example in law schools across the country. It was cited in judicial training programs about trauma-informed justice. It sparked academic papers about how the justice system can better serve veterans. It became a catalyst for systemic change. But perhaps most importantly, it became a story of hope. In a world that often feels divided, harsh, and unforgiving, the Henderson case showed that compassion still exists, that understanding is possible, that mercy matters, that one judge, in one courtroom, on one cold February morning can change lives by simply choosing to see the human being beyond the case number. Robert Henderson's journey didn't end with a dismissed parking ticket. It began there. It began with a judge who took time to listen, to understand, to care. It continued with a community that rallied around a veteran in need. It expanded into policy changes that would help thousands of veterans. It sparked a national conversation about how we treat those who served. 1 year after the initial court hearing, Judge Caprio and Robert Henderson appeared together on national television. They were interviewed about the case, its impact, and the changes that had resulted. The interviewer asked Robert what moment stood out most from that day in court. Robert thought for a moment before answering. It was when Judge Caprio told me to stop apologizing. I'd spent 5 years apologizing for my injuries, for my limitations, for existing as a damaged version of who I used to be. When he told me I had nothing to apologize for, when he validated my pain and honored my service, something broke open inside me. It was like I'd been holding my breath for 5 years and suddenly I could breathe again. The interviewer turned to Judge Caprio. What made you handle this case differently? What made you see beyond the paperwork? Quote. Judge Caprio smiled gently. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I simply listened. I looked at the person standing before me, not just the violations on paper. Robert's pain was visible. His struggle was real. My job isn't just to enforce rules. It's to serve justice. And sometimes, justice means understanding that circumstances matter, that context is everything, that mercy is not weakness, but strength. He continued, we ask young men and women to go to war for us. We send them into impossible situations. We ask them to make split-second decisions that will haunt them forever. We ask them to sacrifice their safety, their health, sometimes their lives. And then when they come home changed by those experiences, we expect them to seamlessly reintegrate into society? That's not fair. That's not just. The least we can do is show understanding and support when they struggle. Hit subscribe if you agree that our veterans deserve compassionate justice. The final chapter of this story will leave you inspired. The interviewer asked one final question. What message do you both want to send to veterans who are struggling? Quote, Robert spoke first. You are not broken. You are not a burden. You are not alone. Whatever you're going through, there are people who understand. There are resources available. There are communities waiting to support you. Please, reach out. Ask for help. It's not weakness, it's courage. I was dying inside before I walked into that courtroom. Not from my physical injuries, but from the shame and isolation I felt. Don't wait as long as I did. Reach out today. Judge Caprio added his voice. To veterans, know that your sacrifice is recognized and honored. You've given more than most people can imagine. You deserve support, compassion, and justice that understands your unique circumstances. To everyone else, I say this: when you encounter a veteran struggling, don't judge, listen, understand, help if you can. These men and women defended our freedom. The least we can do is defend their dignity. The interview ended, but the ripple effects continued. The Henderson Initiative expanded to 30 cities within 2 years. Similar programs were implemented in 42 states. The VA changed several policies regarding how they handled veterans with TBI and PTSD who had minor legal issues. Training programs for judges and police officers began incorporating trauma-informed approaches specifically for veteran interactions. Robert Henderson became an advocate, speaking at veterans' events, sharing his story, encouraging others to seek help. He worked with the Providence Veterans Fund to ensure the scholarships honoring his fallen comrades continued to grow. He mentored younger veterans returning from deployment, helping them navigate the challenges of reintegration. Margaret went back to school and became a licensed counselor specializing in veteran family support. She used her own experiences to help other families dealing with the cascading effects of combat trauma. She wrote a book titled Standing Beside the Warrior: A Family's Journey Through Combat Trauma and Healing, that became required reading in several military family support programs. Emma continued her nursing career but specialized in working with wounded veterans. She took a position at the VA hospital, inspired by how compassionate care had helped her father. She became known for her patience and understanding with patients struggling with behavioral issues related to their injuries. Judge Frank Caprio continued his work on the bench, treating every person who came before him with the same compassion and dignity he'd shown Robert Henderson. More of his cases went viral, each one demonstrating that justice and mercy are not opposing forces but complementary ones. 3 years after the initial hearing, on February 14, 2022, Robert Henderson did something he'd never thought he'd be able to do again. He ran a 5K race. Well, he ran part of it and walked part of it, but he crossed the finish line. The race was a fundraiser for the Providence Veterans Fund. Over 500 people participated. At the finish line, Judge Caprio was waiting to place the medal around Robert's neck. "I'm proud of you," the judge said, embracing Robert. "I wouldn't be here without you," Robert replied. "Literally, I don't know if I would have survived another year of that darkness without what you did." "You would have found a way," Judge Caprio said. "You're a survivor. You're a fighter. I just helped you remember that." Like this video if you believe one act of compassion can change the world. Share it with someone who needs hope today. The Henderson case reminds us of fundamental truths that sometimes get lost in our busy, complicated world. It reminds us that behind every case file is a human story. That circumstances matter. That mercy is not soft on crime, but smart on justice. That our veterans deserve more than thank you for your service platitudes. They deserve action, support, and understanding. It reminds us that judges are not just enforcers of law, but servants of justice, and justice requires wisdom, compassion, and humanity. It reminds us that communities can come together in beautiful ways when given the chance, that strangers can become brothers and sisters through shared values and mutual support. Most importantly, it reminds us that we all have the power to change someone's life through simple acts of kindness, understanding, and recognition. Judge Caprio didn't perform a miracle that day. He didn't bend laws or ignore justice. He simply saw a human being in pain and responded with compassion. He listened when he could have judged. He understood when he could have condemned. He lifted up when he could have pushed down. That's not miraculous. That's human. And it's something every single one of us can do in our daily lives. We can choose to listen before judging. We can choose to understand before condemning. We can choose to see the human behind the mistake, the story behind the action, the pain behind the behavior. Robert Henderson walked into a courtroom expecting punishment and walked out with restored dignity. But the real transformation wasn't just in having tickets dismissed or receiving support. The real transformation was in being seen, heard, and valued as a human being worthy of compassion despite his struggles. That's what we all want, isn't it? To be seen not just for our mistakes, but for our whole story. To be understood not just on the surface, but in our complexity. To be valued not despite our struggles, but including them, recognizing that our wounds and scars are part of what makes us who we are. Drop a comment telling us about a time someone showed you unexpected compassion. These stories need to be shared because they remind us of our shared humanity. 5 years after the initial hearing, the Henderson family, Judge Caprio, and several of the veterans who had stood up in solidarity that day gathered for a reunion. They met at the courthouse where it had all begun. They shared stories, laughter, and a few tears. They talked about how their lives had changed, how the ripple effects of that one February morning had touched thousands of lives. Harold Simmons, the Navy veteran who had offered to pay Robert's fines, brought photos of his grandson's graduation from Marine Corps boot camp. Patricia Rodriguez, the Gulf War veteran, talked about how she'd started a nonprofit connecting female veterans with mental health resources. Others shared their own stories of healing, growth, and service to fellow veterans. As the gathering was ending, Robert stood to address the group. 5 years ago, I walked into a courtroom broken and ashamed. I'm standing here today whole and proud. Not because my injuries are healed, I'll carry these wounds for life, but because I learned that wounds don't define us. How we respond to them, how we support each other through them, how we honor those who didn't make it home by living lives worthy of their sacrifice, that's what defines us. He looked at Judge Caprio. You started something that day, Your Honor. Not just for me, but for all of us. You showed us what's possible when the justice system operates with both strength and compassion. You proved that rules and mercy can coexist. You demonstrated that seeing someone's humanity doesn't mean ignoring their actions. It means understanding their context. Judge Caprio, now 83 years old and preparing for retirement, stood slowly. Robert, you give me too much credit. You and every veteran here are the real heroes. You served your country at great personal cost. You continue to serve by sharing your stories, supporting each other, and advocating for those still struggling. I simply had the privilege of being in the right place at the right time to help in a small way. It wasn't small, Margaret interjected. It was everything. It was the difference between despair and hope, between giving up and fighting on, between isolation and community. Don't ever think what you did was small. Quote, the reunion ended with a group photo on the courthouse steps. Veterans, families, court staff, community members, all brought together by one case that became a movement. The photo was later used in promotional materials for the Henderson Initiative, which by then had expanded to help veterans in over 100 cities across America. Share this with someone in the legal profession who needs to remember why they chose to serve justice. This is what impact looks like. Today, the Henderson case is taught in law schools as an example of restorative justice. It's discussed in psychology programs as a model of trauma-informed practice. It's shown in military training as an example of the long-term effects of combat service. It's referenced in political debates about veteran affairs and support systems. But beyond the academic and policy impacts, it lives in the hearts of people who saw the video or heard the story and felt something shift inside them. It lives in the veteran who finally made that call to the VA after years of suffering in silence. It lives in the judge who decided to ask one more question before rendering judgment. It lives in the family member who reached out to understand instead of criticizing. It lives in the community member who donated time or money to veteran support programs. Robert Henderson didn't set out to change the world. He just went to court to deal with parking tickets. But by being vulnerable, by telling his truth, by allowing his pain to be visible, he sparked a transformation that continues to this day. Judge Frank Caprio didn't set out to become a viral sensation or a model of compassionate justice. He just did what he'd always done, treat people with dignity and recognize their humanity. But in doing so on that particular day with that particular veteran, he created a moment that would inspire millions. That's the power of compassion. That's the impact of mercy. That's what justice can look like when it's tempered with wisdom and humanity. As we close this story, Robert Henderson is doing well. He still has difficult days. His PTSD still flares up. His prosthetic leg still causes pain. His memory still has gaps. But he's no longer drowning in shame. He's no longer suffering in silence. He's no longer alone. He has a community of support. He has a family that understands. He has a purpose in helping other veterans. He has hope for the future, and he has the memory of a cold February morning when a judge looked past the paperwork and saw him, really saw him, and chose mercy. Judge Caprio has since retired from the bench, but his legacy continues. The thousands of cases he handled with compassion, the countless lives he touched with understanding, the systemic changes he inspired through his example, these continue to ripple outward. The courtroom where the Henderson case was heard has become something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in restorative justice. Visitors come to see where this transformation happened. They sit in the gallery and imagine that February morning. They're inspired to bring more compassion into their own spheres of influence. Hit that like button if this story has inspired you to see justice differently. Comment with your thoughts on how we can better support our veterans. And subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. This is more than a story about parking tickets. It's a story about what happens when we choose to see beyond surfaces. When we choose to ask questions instead of making assumptions. When we choose to understand instead of condemn. When we choose to lift up instead of push down. It's a story about a veteran who found his voice again. About a judge who honored the spirit of the law while enforcing its letter. About a family that held together through impossible strain. About a community that rallied around one of their own. About a nation that was reminded of its obligation to those who served. But most of all, it's a story about hope. Hope that compassion still exists. Hope that understanding is possible. Hope that our struggles don't define us. Hope that our wounds can become sources of strength. Hope that one moment of grace can change everything. Robert Henderson walked into a courtroom apologizing for his existence. He walked out knowing his worth. That transformation from shame to dignity, from isolation to community, from despair to hope. That's what this story is really about, and it's available to all of us. We can all choose compassion over judgment, understanding over condemnation, mercy over harshness. We can all be like Judge Caprio, taking a moment to see the human beyond the case, the story beyond the violation, the worth beyond the struggle. We can all be like the veterans who stood in solidarity, supporting a brother in need. We can all be like Margaret and Emma, standing beside someone we love through their darkest times. We can all be like the court staff and community members who gave what they could to help. Every single day, we have opportunities to change someone's life through compassion. A kind word when harshness is expected, a listening ear when judgment is feared, a helping hand when isolation seems certain. These aren't grand gestures. They're simple human acts, but they have the power to transform. Robert Henderson's story reminds us that we never know what someone is carrying. The person who seems difficult might be struggling with invisible wounds. The person who makes mistakes might be fighting battles we can't see. The person who appears to have it together might be barely holding on. So we must choose compassion. We must choose to ask questions. We must choose to understand before we judge. We must choose to remember that behind every action is a human story, complex and nuanced and worthy of consideration. Drop a final comment. What will you do differently after hearing this story? How will you bring more compassion into your daily life? Your answer matters because collectively, we can create a world where more people experience the grace Robert Henderson received. The beautiful response Judge Caprio gave wasn't just beautiful in the moment, it was beautiful in its lasting impact. It changed a life, changed a family, changed a community, and sparked a movement. That's what real justice looks like. That's what true compassion accomplishes. That's what happens when we choose to see each other's humanity, Thank you for watching this story. Thank you for caring enough about veterans and justice to make it to the end. If this moved you, please share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it. Someone is struggling in silence. Someone has given up hope. Your sharing of this story might be the thing that reminds them they're not alone, that compassion exists, that there are people who care. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us of the best of humanity. Like this video if it impacted you. And most importantly, go out into your world and be like Judge Caprio. See people, hear them, understand them, show mercy, choose compassion, change lives. Because that's what Robert Henderson's story ultimately teaches us. One moment of compassion can change everything. One choice to see humanity can transform a life. One decision to show mercy can spark a movement. Be that person. Create that moment. Spark that change. The world needs more Judge Caprios, more understanding, more mercy, more compassion. It starts with each of us, in our daily interactions and our spheres of influence, in the moments when we choose how to respond to someone else's struggle. Robert Henderson would tell you, reach out if you're struggling. Judge Caprio would tell you, show compassion to those who are. And this story tells us all, transformation is possible, hope is real, and mercy matters. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Now go forth and change someone's world through compassion. Just like Judge Caprio changed Robert Henderson's world on that beautiful February morning in Providence, Rhode Island. A morning that proved justice and mercy can not only coexist but create something more powerful than either could alone. Hope, healing, and transformation that echoes through lives, communities, and across a nation that needs to remember how to honor those who sacrificed everything for our freedom. This is what beautiful looks like. This is what justice should be. This is what happens when we choose to see each other's humanity. Share this story. It matters.